Laura, I think we can start.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. A warm welcome to you all. My name is Laura Vigano. I am from the University of Bergamo, a founding member of the platform, and I coordinate a financial development group, research group there. I have the pleasure to be the moderator of this session on In the Midst of a Storm, COVID-19 and the agricultural sector. We all know where we are with respect to the spread of the COVID-19 and what measures are taken in the different countries all over the world. In the South, the lockdown measures have largely been removed, and people can go around, move around, field visits are allowed, at least for the time being. However, the effect of this crisis are still important for millions of people. And in the agricultural sector in particular, the pandemic adds to other challenges always faced by farmers, droughts, floods, locusts, or plant diseases, just to mention some of them. I would say that it's not just an addition because they are compounded, the impact are compounded, and so the most vulnerable communities are subject to the risk that is increasing exponentially. So how are farmers and rural operators living these challenges? What are their experiences? What are their reactions? And what perspectives for the agricultural sector? What can be the role of different stakeholders, the FSPs, founders, NGOs, policymakers? We can exchange views on these issues with our two speakers. The speakers today are Michael de Groot, Rabobank Foundation Rural Fund. He has 27 years experience in rural microfinance and agri-value chains. And he spent time in Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, and South America. And Massimo Pera from FAO currently is in charge for global initiatives and programs on agricultural investments and access to financial services for agribusinesses. He has extensive experience in the design and implementation of agricultural and rural financial programs. Next slide, please. While inviting them to share their views with the audience, I very warmly encourage the audience to contribute to the discussion. The slide that is projected now reports some opinions that were expressed within the COVID-19 Financial Inclusion Compact that was recently published by the e-MFP. How do people live the threats of the pandemics? Some examples taken from the slide: lack of information impeded making effective decisions, for example, or the informal sector was heavily penalized. On these and other aspects that will be touched, please write your contributions in the chat. I will have the task to report this to the speakers. And I'm sure that the speakers will make good use of these contributions and add these to their discussion. Now I give the floor to Massimo that starts sharing their views. Massimo?
Okay, here. Hi. So thank you very much, Laura, for the introduction, and thanks everybody. Michael and I will just start with an overview of the effect that the pandemic had on agriculture, and I will try to give a quick overview of trends on production and on prices as well. An overview of these global trends, and then we'll narrow down to concrete effects to farmers and to value chain players and actors. So just in general, the effect of the pandemics on agricultural products was different if comparing staple commodity products like wheat, maize, corns, soybeans, oilseeds, and high-value commodities like fruits, vegetable and fishery-related products. This is because, of course, staple commodities are capital intensive, so the impact was, there was a minor impact. The actual impact was mostly about the logistics that was affected. So the restriction, the movement restriction at ports, at airports, and so on, affected trade in this sense. Whereas for high-value commodities, which requires a large amount of labor, the impact were quite huge. So the production slowed down, the trade slowed down, and even more for those crops who are more perishable because they couldn't be stocked, and much food from this category was lost. Michael, you want to go ahead with coffee and chocolate?
Sorry, thank you. I had to unmute it myself. Thank you very much. I know it's 3 afternoon, so for some of you must have been hard already listening all day or yesterday, but we try to keep it lively and short. So we welcome any comment and any experience from yourself. So really it's open. So adding to what Massimo said from the FAO on worldwide level, and indeed staple food versus high value commodity, we really saw what we really noticed were some quite strong changes. For example, coffee worldwide, due to the lockdown, and everyone, especially the first months, was closed down. So everyone started drinking at home instead of out of home. So what really changed was, for example, that bars, restaurants, takeaway shops were closed in the first months and everyone consumed at home. But it had also another effect, that the quality of coffee changed. So the purchase model changed. So many coffee producers worldwide still could sell volumes, but the demand in Europe, United States, was different. So still, for example, they had to sell at lower prices, for example. That was one. And cocoa, chocolate, really, we saw less consumption. You know, there is only a limit to what you consume at home. So really prices went down for a while. And then for the other 5 bullet points, we really go very short, only for a second, just to explain very weird things what changed. For example, in South Africa, the oranges, they were still working despite COVID, despite limitations in staff, workers bringing to the fields. But then suddenly the export stopped because there was no pellet factory. There was no pellet to export, so which means that governments closed down the non-essential industry. So there were some really weird side effects of COVID related to that. And what we notice, of course, with food production, local food production, that local markets were closed down because of fear of spreading. So the people had to, with fresh fruit, as Massimo said, the fresh vegetables couldn't be brought to the market. And especially we see in the next couple of slides, which Massimo will take over, for example, milk. In the first moment, milk had to be thrown away because the fresh milk couldn't be transported to the consumer. It had to be thrown away. Then suddenly there was a shortage of milk and milk prices went up again. So very erratic patterns in prices. So over to you, Massimo.
Yeah, just to add here that, again, transportation, limitation to transportation affected, even if some of the vessels still work, but affected global exports and global trade. So that those kind of commodities were the most affected. And then as side effects as well, you know, with the lockdowns and the closure of many business, many people lost their employ. And this affected especially women forced at home, which kind of affected the imbalance, the gender imbalance. And also the remittances. If you think that migrants are those who are the more unstable employment, they lost it with no safeguards, and so the amount of money they sent home, which contributes to impact, reduced as well. So you see a lot of different side effects for rural areas and for agriculture. I think we can move to the next slide. And here, I just trying to give an overview of prices, because this is also quite relevant. And the map you see here is a map that it's prepared by FAO on a continuous basis with the changes in price. So you can see what happened between February and more or less these days. Some countries saw an increase in price in food price of around 3-4%. So European, European countries, US, Canada, China as well. There was an increase in this last 9 months of around 3-4%, due to the fact that the quantity of some specific food decreased. In BRICS countries, the average is a bit higher, is between 7 to 9%. But the most severe increases were registered in countries where other factors had already led to an increase in prices, and there the impact of the pandemic hit this increase severely. Argentina, for example, the reason why many food commodities increased was because of the depreciation of the country's currency, which went up of 30% of value of the US dollar. And in more, the fruits, vegetables, tubers, beans were the food products whose price increased incredibly. And Sudan, to give another example, in Sudan, it's also the issue of the depreciation of the country's currency, plus the food-related disruptions due to the pandemic. So you see, at global level, you can see that map. There's an average increase at global level of prices, but compared to the increase that we had seen in other period, this has been quite more severe. Michael, you have anything on this, or shall we? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Just 1 minute, nothing more. What you see, for example, a very serious impact was government measures. Governments closed the borders. For example, there were rice exporters or beans, pulses exporters to other landlocked countries who didn't producers and were net importers depending on that. But these governments closed the borders because they wanted to have food security for their own population. And then in the other country, there was a sudden shortage, a serious shortage. And especially again, we see here again that poor population is then suffering beyond any normal measure and suffering extra because of some very strong measures taken.
Yeah, exactly. In the next slide, we can see, the trend of prices, and this is based on the FAO Food Price Index, which reports on monthly changes in international prices for a specific basket of commodities like meat, dairy, cereals. So here you can see, so there was around April and May a decrease in general, but then prices went up again, and this is what the index shows. And especially for meat, the meat was one of the sectors that was affected most due to the COVID-19 economic hardship, and this was due to a reduced demand from the sector of food service and catering. The logistical bottlenecks we talked about, so everything related to slaughtering, transportation, exports, and so on. And also, again, the limited availability of foreign exchange, so reduced import of meat. So notwithstanding with the stable demand for meat from China, for example, the overall industry was affected, and you see how the prices went down. Michael, anything else? Unless
only on the dairy part, as explained before. The dairy, of course, this is a much more complex graph of many different variables.
Yeah.
But regarding the fresh milk, what you could see clearly, because of transport problems and because, of course, that small farmers couldn't keep the milk. They don't have tanks. They couldn't keep it for weeks, so they had to throw it away. So then you see really that the prices went down of fresh milk, and then even some of them had to slaughter the cows, and then there was a shortage and prices went up. But also the other variables behind it, for example, that there was not enough capacity, for example, to process milk into dry milk or other products immediately. So you see very strong effects on prices which we haven't seen the year or the years before. Please go ahead, Massimo.
Yeah, I think we can move to the next slide now. Next slide, please. I'm still seeing the same one. Can you hear me? Yes. Oh, it's loading. Okay, so it's coming, It's coming shortly. Well, I can start maybe introducing what you'll see on next slide. So basically, this is the case of the Kenya agricultural sector. And this is the telephone interviews held by 60 decibels with 500 farmers. So we had some feedback from the farmers' experience with the pandemic. I don't know if you can see it now. No, not yet. So, Michael, shall I go or you want to go on this? You're muted. You are muted, Michael.
No, I was. Okay, we just do it by our head.
No, I mean I can go. I have it in front of me if you want. So.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
So go ahead.
Yeah. So again, interviews with 500 farmers, both involved in livestock and agriculture, and these interviews were held during the small rainy season to start planting new crop. So basically, the most relevant feedback we got from that farmers experienced were, first of all, challenges in cash. This goes quite without saying, no cash available. It was hard to sell products, so lack of liquidity in general. Affordable inputs were not prices of inputs went up because, again, due to the restriction, for farmers it was hard to reach their dealers and to buy inputs at the usual prices. So there was an increase in prices, and some farmers just couldn't get high quality inputs. Access to market was also affected due to restriction. Information on prices, which are usually available to many farmers, were not available, and this led to a loss. 25% of farmers reported a loss at least in one of their sources of income. Smallholder farmers have a diversified source of income, but at least one of them was lost, and this increased enormously their vulnerability. Strongly at household level. This effect, this had an impact on food security in general and on nutrition as well, because if small farmers already struggle to get average food quality for them, depending on countries, of course, in this situation, of course, the trade-off leads you to choose low quality food. So in terms of nutrition also, the pandemic had an effect. Mikkel, feel free to step in. I just go ahead.
No, you're right. It's complete. What we see here now as an example, these are smallholders, and the example is only Kenya as statistical view, but it's of course valid for other countries too, many other countries, that really smallholders were struggling. Really struggling due to other causes that for example, agri-input dealers got nervous, right, and prices went up, so they couldn't buy it. Their MFIs or SACCOs suddenly didn't have liquidity because there was a run, so they were delayed. So even if it's a short-term, not too high impact, what we're seriously afraid of, what will happen with the next season, because there will, of course, less agri-inputs, less seeds, no labor, because they couldn't afford labor, so no migrants, and the migrants can eat either. So then we see a less production next season, which means it has a serious impact on the food production next year. And that's more the long-term effect. And then especially in a vulnerable group as 500 million smallholders, serving even 2 billion people in the cities. So that's the most pregnant impact what we have. So if you would introduce the next...
let me try to share my screen at this point. Maybe it's better, no? So I can share the presentation and... no, okay, that doesn't work. Screen share. Okay, let's try.
I think it's going to come
I'll just
soon.
go ahead. Okay, so then how did the farmers adjust? Well, and the agri-SMEs, one of the main things that was done was basically to reduce the labor hired for weeding, plugging, harvesting. So less, reduction on field employment, and basically, a higher weight on the shoulders of the farmers with reduced productivity and reduced production. Minor purchase of inputs, as I was saying, and then they started selling produce, even with problems of access to market. But what's interesting is that the main driver of these adjustments that the farmers made was not actually the cost reduction per se, but it was the cost reduction, not the health concerns due to the COVID-19. And I think this is something that happened in many countries, in Africa, in South America, and in Eastern Asia. I mean, in many villages, people can just not apply restrictions, can just not apply lockdown to themselves. And again, as the figures we saw in Sub-Saharan Africa, of course, were not that severe as they were in Europe, for example. So people were not so much concerned by the health aspects, but more by the cost related aspects.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. What we see, and please, again, everyone, feel free to comment, feel free to send your own experience. We're really open to learn from you. What I have heard from my colleagues, understood from my colleagues in India, in Peru, in Bolivia, Ecuador, is that, for example, in India, which is, of course, a huge country with more than 1 billion people, that people, local workers, migrant workers, were sent home from the cities due to COVID restrictions. They went massively at home because they couldn't work. They couldn't find the informal sector, informal work in the cities. They went home, they went to the countryside. But of course, on the countryside, there was no much labor either. So the smallholder farmers there said, I just have many more mouths to feed. I don't know how to do it, how to deal with it. Well, the same for Peru. The same for Peru, of course, that people started also writing. They could not, even if they wanted to, and they were very, very aware of the serious situation with COVID, very aware of health regulations. But out of sheer poverty, out of the need to feed their children, they couldn't stay at home any longer than 2 weeks because they didn't have money. They needed to find some labor, some work, or anything to survive. So these are really all kinds of side effects. I think we can go to the next slide. I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
May I encourage the audience to contribute? I see up to now no messages in the chat, but if you, I think you may have something. These two speakers have a very extensive experience, and I'm sure that in the audience we have people with the same level of experience. So it would be very beneficial if you wanted to contribute with other inputs to this discussion. Thank you.
Okay, and on this one, on the impact, yeah, as we were saying, so you see, we haven't seen an immediate impact because for the first months, at least for staple crops, we were also, taking advantage of the stocks that we had, the reserves that we had. So there was not a huge lack of food from one day to another. However, the impact of these pandemics depends on several things, and we're going to see in the upcoming season some medium-term effects, if you will, because this depends on many things. And Michael, feel free to step in on this. I mean, it depends on the cropping cycles, on the season when they start. Again, mobility restrictions. Imagine that. Now let's start getting close to the finance-related issues. So, if you cannot move to the field, then an insurer cannot come to do the assessment of a damage, so it cannot reimburse you. And financial institutions cannot decide whether you are eligible for a loan. I mean, this is what also the restriction means in practical terms, right? Again, the issue of yes, Miguel.
Sorry to interrupt, but I see some very good points and questions coming up. I see excellent points. If I may quickly,
Go. Yes.
there is a very good Nancy. Forgive me, I don't say all the last names for privacy reasons, I think. Nancy, about similar experience in Cambodia in the case of COVID, and but the borders were closed, so supplementary income gain through informal sector immediately stopped and put lots of pressure. Yes, we see that, especially if I refer to Jamie Anderson of CGAP on the Financial Diaries, that often these families at the lower end of the income levels, that they really depend sometimes on 3 or 4 incomes. Their worker, their household keeper. It's true. That's what we see. Nadia mentioned something about the finance, which you started, Massimo. Nadia mentioned something about the question and the discussion, so perhaps you can go into it. Nadia said really, and then perhaps you can comment on it. Based on the survey conducted near the MFI clients, it appears that rural clients, and more specifically producers, were less affected by COVID than others. We have observed less default in agricultural loan portfolio. Thank you. Excellent question, Nadia. If I may say so, Uriaminci.
Yes.
From our point of view as a rural fund, and we're doing agricultural loans, yes, partly yes, and partly still we suffer in the sense that the ones who could produce, for example, beans, rice, potatoes, quinoa, and sell to markets, they were much less affected. And actually, our agricultural loan portfolio is doing very well. To be honest, this year, actually, it's doing very well. But the other rural clients who were part of the service additional to it, the transporting products, or the ones repairing things, or the ones in the fresh products, like the fresh produce which was rotten in the field, yes, they were suffering. I don't know, Massimo.
Yeah, more or less the same thing. At the same time, there are 2 issues, I guess. This is very generic. It doesn't apply to all the financial institutions, but medium-term loans and long-term loans respect the seasonalities of crops. So we might not have seen an immediate default due to the frequency of payment based on seasonalities. That's one thing. And the other thing is that, yes?
No, go ahead. And then I'll do the next one.
Yeah, and the other thing is that what we have seen for many institutions we work with is that financial institutions try to apply immediately was moratoria on the loan and deferred repayment. So loans were restructured specifically for farmers due to the risk, the exposure at risk of that portfolio. So that's another reason, I guess, why compared to other sector, it seemed that repayment were not affected in this respect.
Sorry, I have 2 more. And then we go to the next slide, because one brings us to the next slides.
Okay.
One is very good of Alexandra Sanchez, Indonesia. Thank you, Alexandra. We're also working in Indonesia as a Rabobank, so it's I can answer directly. In Indonesia, we managed to ease a distance communication in the value chain via mobile phone app. Are there other similar initiatives like this? Yes, indeed. In Africa, for example, there are different mobile communication technologies and mobile payment systems. Although I must say it's double. It has a positive effect and a negative effect. The positive effect with mobile money and communication is that some things could go on because they didn't need to get cash and the business could go on. On the other hand, there is a large target group, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of people who are excluded from it. They're not inclusive yet, excluded from it, and they really were delayed. So is Massimo from the FAO, did you see that on mobile communication and mobile payments, platforms? How's the development of platforms, for example? So produce.
No, exactly. I'm thinking more about the e-commerce platforms that are now spreading in East African countries, in Kenya, in Uganda, West Africa, in Nigeria, Ghana. Of course, these platforms helped overcome some of the barriers, including the lack of intermediation and middlemen and so on. But still, I'm not sure. Looking at I think with a broad view, if given that there are a few cases still, if I think about Sub-Saharan Africa, I don't think the existence of the platform themselves help diminishing the effects of the pandemics on trade in general.
Okay, thank you. Then I'll use, and of course I give it back to you, Laura. Sorry to be interrupting, but I'll give it back to you, Laura. Then I would.
No, I do appreciate that you are able to handle the questions by yourself. So, we have one now from Patricia Richter, and I think it's interesting. She says, "Thank you for the breakdown of the different value chains. In terms of lack of seasonal effects, what do you suggest could be done to ease the lag effect of unavailability of inputs during the last seasons? Investors, FSPs, development partners?"
I would say, if I may, can we use the two comments by Nancy on the immediate challenges and recovery phase, and the one of Patricia for the next slides, because in the next, I think in the next 7 slides, we will go to these answers. So we'll skip this one. We're now in the discussion phase. So we'll this one, and we go to the next slides where the answers are more or less open for discussion. Please, Massimo, go.
Yeah, I think, okay, so immediate challenges for smallholders and as we go into the recovery. Well, the thing is that it depends on countries and on the kind of recovery. You have countries where, for example, the central banks and the government have, given subsidies or credit lines to banks to on lend to farmers. So, and this was to push an immediate availability of funding and financing for farmers plus grants. But of course, it depends on countries. What the EU is doing for its member countries is not what other regional banks can do for their member countries in other regions, right? So we'll still see probably a reduced supply of lending in developing countries. I mean, the risk aversion, the traditional prudence and lack of access to financing for agriculture will at least continue, if not increase. Some disruptions, in supply channels and transportation and logistics will keep being there. And when we interact with financial institutions and investors as well, we try to see what are the best ways for keep investing, and we'll come to this later. I mean, there are with the crisis, this crisis always come opportunities, but at this very moment, of course, it's this is a sector. If you think about the missing middle in agriculture, so those actors who are not covered because they're they're too bankable to be for the MFIs, but too small to be for the banks. They will be those more affected because they were struggling to get financing, agri-SMEs, for example, to get financing, and they will keep struggling because those who didn't finance them before will not necessarily, doing it now. So, Michael, I don't know from the investor's point of view, from a bank point of view.
Oh yes, it's different, different from yours because I'm in the middle of the mud of that and in the middle of some problems regarding. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Patricia, for challenging us. Your questions are quite interesting. So I'm trying. I already revealed the answers on some next slides, so we can go quicker. But so, what can we do as financiers, as social lenders, as rural banks? Or investors, what can we do? And so actually it's a wide mix of answers in the effect that, well, of course, first on short notice, you help out to restructure some loans and provide some new working capital if there is a cash limitation of some liquidity issues. The second one, the other things, what happens, for example, especially the question on, there was a question on the agri-input suppliers and low inputs, is you see more and more, I guess, due to also our global world, due to our more interrelations in the world and interrelations of value chains, even if they're loose value chains, you see an integration of services, so integration of different actors, which means that the agri-input suppliers with the resellers, the local shops, and then the co-ops or the SMEs in the agribusiness are more and more interrelated, so they will provide, for example, something on credit or more on time and hoping to receive it to get back part of the payment through the next crop. We see more systems like that. We see other interventions, other designs of the value chains that they're getting closer and more integrated, that, for example, SMEs are really taking over, not taking over, but more upstream and downstream, so they take over a few links in the chains to do that service, to offer that service. You see platforms, but still it's not really working with fresh products or local food products. A traditional market is actually until now quite a good working system, but you see it in coffee, in cocoa, let's say the higher value end products. You see platforms starting to really coming up and filling in some gaps regarding to, and also regarding the finance. In some countries, but then you need a bit more a higher middle income country, because you see then a population who can afford it. You see a renewal of interest of a kind of co-op structure, and I mean, for example, the Italian co-op, the consumer co-op, that you see that consumers already do some advances and pay, for example, to the producer for rice, for the potatoes, or for the milk. So you get more or less a kind of direct trade. So we see many of these type of, but we see that we go quickly to the next slides. Also regarding a question from Mr. David Castellani from the University of Bergamo. In some cases, the agri-loan portfolio performs better than other portfolios. See, yes, that's true. Some MFIs are taking it as an opportunity to expand to the agri-sector. What can explain that? Well, for me, really directly as Rabo Foundation and Rural Fund, we have not seen it that MFIs are really opening to step into it. Actually, in the second half of this year, we're trying to motivate them. We're trying to provide them technical assistance. We're trying to help them to increase that, actually. But we would welcome anyone, please, you're open to send it to us if there are MFIs really taking that opportunity. What we notice indeed, what might be a part of the explanation, and then I leave it to Massimo. Well, one of them, why agri-loan portfolio is performing better, because it's food and we need to eat, and it still continues. There are disruptions in value chain, but still to continue, and still food will be necessary, and it will become more extreme. But on the other hand, some MFIs, to my opinion, but my experience, are still a bit reluctant. So we would welcome any innovative MFI in the sector. But Massimo, if you could answer, and then we can skip to some.
Yeah, no, I mean, from a development organization perspective, I think it was also on this was also the question from Patricia, I guess. You know, we're working side by side with governments of our member countries, and you know, the kind of policy advice that we give them, and the kind of support that we give together with other organizations, is to intervene at least at 3 different levels. So first of all, expand and improve emergency food assistance and social protection programs, because you know. Food banks and community-based groups, you know, supported by the governments, should be mobilized to deliver, you know, food more and more as families stay home. And another one would be to give smallholder farmers support to 2 ways: to both enhance their productivity and to market the food they produce. Also through e-commerce, e-commerce channels. And this, I mean, this is the result of a collaboration between governments and the private sector. We need to make sure that where such e-commerce platforms work, they should be expanded, And of course, this is a role played also by the governments, who should meet the basic energy needs of smallholder farmers and rural households. And another one is to, keep the supply chain, the food value chain alive by, addressing some key logistic bottlenecks. For example, there are the logistic components of the supply chains need to be properly tested, and the workers working in ports, port staff, they should be considered as essential personnel, and so they should receive proper health and safety measures so that they can keep working and that the supply chain can be kept alive.
Okay, but I will contradict you on that. That's nice, because otherwise we would be boring if it would be the same.
Yeah, of course.
Laura, indeed, I think this slide we can skip now. We've discussed it, or Massimo has explained. That one we also can leave it. These were just comments, but we already get some nice points from our participants, from our discussion. So this one we can leave too. We're already in the middle of.
Yes, I think we may focus on this, on the FSP providers. I think it's interesting.
No, this is also standard. So this is also our, okay. I see Nancy knows, and Patricia knows. They're very experienced. They know all these standards. They know the standard answers, and we give the slides. So I would like to go to the next one.
Okay.
Yes, here we go. Here we go to a key slide. And Massimo, here is, I agree with you with the point you said. The only thing is, to be honest, we're not as fast as we want to. We're not as fast and quick as we want to. So 4 points you mentioned, and it's all related to the questions of Nancy, Patricia, and David, and 2 others I saw. And it's, yes, we also have a serious the innovation department doing a lot in agro-innovation, agtech, fintech, even to smallholders, and not only the big farmers in Brazil with 10,000 hectares, really smallholders. But it's the promise of agtech, it still takes longer than you think. Technology exists and it's good. Actually, it's quite good. But there is a really serious limitation with price and pricing. It's still quite expensive. For just one example, because we also need to keep time. For example, palm oil, and I'm talking about real serious organic palm oil production, organic, safe food, and then you can do it with drones, and drones keep the quality of the soil, keep the quality of the trees, monitor everything. But still, the price per hectare to do that kind of work, it's quite high for a smallholder. It's real. So technology is still, we need to do it. It's really good. We need to do it, and it really offers solutions. But it will take the next 10 years. The same is with the platform. Unfortunately, we started now platforms at least with cocoa and coffee, because they're a bit higher value, and we can directly to some consumers, some direct trade to some. But with others, it's still it takes time. It takes time to develop that. So we have 4 or 5 points what we can do. So answering the questions, what we can do really is indeed offer other financial instruments as social lenders, social offers, like a bit more in warehouse receipts, a bit more in borrowing based, longer term finance. It sounds very stupid and simple, but it's still very valid. Financing, for example, good storage quality, storage, silos, and cold rooms, that will help, and shorter supply chains, bringing indeed what you said, you called it the marketing aspect, really bringing more directly the marketing. People want to know where the food comes from, also locally. So that's true. We can do that more. Another is really on the climate resilient systems, really on financing. These are all issues what a financier can do. Then I'll give you back the word. I only want to go into one question here is of whether it was Ben or David. Ben.
He adds to David a comment, and he confirms the trend, even if he doesn't see that that MFIs in Myanmar moves into agri-lending. But he says he confirms that the quality is better for the agri sector.
Yes, that's what I wanted, because we're financing 3 MFIs in Myanmar, but we have not seen any. I cannot say anything about the impact. I'm sorry, it's too early. Indeed, it's right, David or Ben. It's too early to say. Indeed, we're doing it in Myanmar, Indonesia, Philippines, and then in Latin America, in Mexico and Central America, but we cannot show the impact yet. I think, Massimo, would you continue with this slide and explain a bit?
Yeah, so here comes the optimistic part, let's say. No, the long-term vision that we need to have as financiers, as investors, as development organizations, because, food systems, and so the way in which food is produced, transformed, and consumed will be key for achieving and delivering the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, right? And in this respect, the Secretary General of the UN has called, and we lost a summit, the Food System Summit in 2021, which is quite ambitious. The objective is to invest in diverse ways to make food system inclusive, climate adapted, and resilient, and supportive of sustainable peace. So besides this very ambitious objective, you see the concept of the summit reflects the increasing concerns that regards diet-related health effects, for example, the damage of food systems, of unbalanced food system on the ecosystems, the damage and the effects, the links to climate change, and even the pandemic, partly, is due to these completely unbalanced food systems, right? Which distress, whose effects distress among millions of smallholder farmers. And so basically there is a need to look at this crisis as an opportunity to change the way we invest in food systems. And we need to make sure that we all contribute to the transformation on food systems so that they are more aligned, if you will, with the SDGs goals. And, think about it, in an age of unprecedented wealth and progress, while we produce much more food than we eat, we still have more than 800 million people hungry and 2 billion adults overweight. So there's an imbalance. There's something that's not working. But for food systems to transform towards sustainability, there's a need to put in place different kinds of incentives. So on one side, this is what we argue here. On one side, policy incentives are needed with interventions to facilitate the regulatory environment through adapted fiscal regulation, job creation facilities, employment upgrading and improved regulation, intervention on trade barriers, and so on. And on the other side, these incentives should be accompanied by a set of sustainability requirements for investments. Anything we do today must be sustainable. That goes without saying, right? So investments should be driven by increased opportunities to invest in a way, though, that overcomes the traditional trade-off between profitability on one side and social or environmental sustainability on the other side. Investment should instead generating both. So we need to find ways, and there are so many different actors working on it now. So I don't know, Mikael, what's your view on this? Have I been too optimistic, or?
No, thank you for handing over, because it brings and it's a nice bridge for closing and bringing together, summarizing. You gave the picture from the multinational, how do you say that, worldwide view. FAO, of course, is a UN worldwide organization. So I'm really happy if FAO really promotes this among all the members or among the states, because this is the way to go. I'm bringing it down to a more my simple position as a barefoot credit deliverer or a barefoot banker, or even as our bank. Even if we're a big food and agri bank and we're in 40 countries, still these are quite really, wow, I mean, incredible challenges how to deal with this. We have to. And I'll start negatively and positively. For example, yes, we're a bank, we're a food and agri bank, and yes, we do soy, we finance soy in Brazil. And yes, soy in Brazil, of course, with deforestation, the Amazon, bad products bring it to Europe, the cows are eating it, they have too much methane and other things, so it's not sustainable at all and sort of thing. So let's start from that point. So indeed, we as a bank are really conscious about it, its unbalanced, value chains are unbalanced, the policy intensive, everything, also even bad policies from EU system, EU subsidies to the agriculture sector, which are completely unbalanced. So more sustainable. So we're looking in the last decade, and 20 years ago, it was called, it's ridiculous and sort of thing. And now it's becoming mainstream. It was ridiculous to have, for example, only local food, people only eating local within the 100-mile zone. You're a bit idealistic, or you're Zen, or whatever you are, or yoga. And now it's really becoming serious. Also, whether it's Amsterdam or whether it's...
I agree.
Look at Italy. Look at Italy with this Co-op, your very large supermarket store. They have really, really complete packages of these local produce. And so they really take it serious. And that's the same we do in several countries, but we also do it then as Rabobank, that we say we cannot anymore just, move our food around the world everywhere without transparent, without knowing. And especially also if we know that the world population 5 years ago is living more in cities than on the countryside. And then, we're talking about big cities of 20 million people. We have many cities of 20 million people. So you have to organize your food system, water, residues, everything should be more recycled, reused. So we really have to work on a more integrated system, not as a theory, as practice, starting small within our own environment, whether it's Amsterdam or Milan or Bergamo, starting it in Lima, starting it everywhere, and having this more systemic approach. And also as a lender, we also have taking this approach. So even as a simple lender, it's indeed, we have impact measurement, financing more, having the guts to say, no, we refuse something which is not proper, which is not good, and which is dangerous. We have to look on what is the impact of our finance to have it more sustainable. And we have to look on our long-term effects on it and financing more, which has an ecosystem in it. I agree with it. So we have to translate your 4 bullet points into some practical lending criteria. With it. I think there is someone, last remark, Laura?
Yes, so there was a contribution by Patricia again that actually was digging into the sustainability requirements, asking what would be these requirements for investments that further balance food systems. And she says that she hasn't come across such a systemic approach in the financial ecosystem yet.
Well, if I can answer first, the work that we are doing with not only impact investors, but also purely private investment funds and so on. Some of them are coming to us and saying, "Look, we need guidelines, green financing, what it is about. Give us indicators. How do we invest in sustainably in SMEs?" And we're coming, the work that we do as FAO is this kind of what we call the normative work, identifying guidelines, tools, softwares, and principles and indicators for, and the sustainability is not only environmental, of course, it has to be environmental, and we have several tools on this, but it's also the social one. So it's also the one related to youth employment and to gender balance and so on. But again, on the environmental side, we're now working on profiling SMEs who has a sustainable waste management system, for example. There are so many things that you need to look at, and we can accompany, the work that we can do as FAO is to accompany these kind of investments and make sure that they are more and more sustainable. But let me tell you, we are the number of financial institutions and investors who are coming to us is increasing. So this must mean something. Michael, confirm, please.
Well, I only know, but I don't know by heart. I just saw it this week. I think yesterday, I'm not sure how to say it. Yesterday, I think there were 150 banks worldwide and organizations, etc., who has describing a new sustainability standard minimum level indeed. So it's but we still have 5 minutes. So I would like to use 3 minutes to someone who stole my heart. Oh, it's lost now. I think it was Eliseo Carrion. So bringing your big sustainability view back to very downwards cooperative, farmers cooperative, local environment, local society, consumers, producers together. Eliseo said something very nice, and I really thank him for that. Considering the impact in demand and constraints in supply chain, whole logistic process, everything, do you think the context may be an opportunity for cooperatives, associations to grow a number of members, contribute to connect small farmers with the whole value chain, and association still farmers will be very low? Eliseo, you're touching a subject which I'm raised with. My grandfather was one of the founders of a co-op in Germany, long time ago. But I think what perhaps my generation, I'm 55, my generation and my parents in the 60s have done wrong. We tried to grow, we tried to food for everything. I think now we're having 2 decades of more networking via virtual systems, of more coming together, of more local, of more direct interaction. And I think that there is a new era of cooperatives or like-wise organizations, community-driven. So we're talking about the decades of community-driven, indeed, of bringing these overcoming these constraints, and whether it's local production, local consumption, or whether it's on a regional level. And I think as FAO, as a bank, we consider regional levels like a Horn of Africa, although it's not very good at the moment with Ethiopia, but great regional level in which they can be much more self-sufficient regarding food production. So not traveling everywhere around the world that food, but no, great region that 2 or 3 countries together are much closer related in sustainable food production. So indeed, yes, I agree. Cooperatives really can make a change and contribute. We still see it in old continental Europe, but it's very strong in Latin America too, and parts of Asia. I think it's really something with technical assistance by many good NGOs to foster and develop that, to make them strong community-based organizations. It's true. Sorry, the last words for Laura and Massimo?
Yes.
No, I don't know. I just saw there was a comment that was about Agri-Ecology, so maybe, which mentions FAO. Yes, it's true, from Claire. It's true. I mean, Agri-Ecology is one way, so FSPs should start looking more into agroecology. This is something we promote definitely with them. And also indigenous vegetables. I mean, sometimes you find that the markets for indigenous vegetables in some countries are growing. So short value chains is one of the answers, And this is where I say that the crisis translates into an opportunity, because you can invest on crops that are local, that are traditional, that have nutritional impact. Something like let's say the revamping of the quinoa in the last years for Southern American countries, or amaranthus in Eastern Africa. I mean, this is one of the ways to start investing in a more sustainable way, I would say. So thank Claire for making this point. Laura, back to you.
If you want to add anything, the 2 speakers are related to wrap up, a sort of wrap up of your contributions. Otherwise, what I can say is that this is too bad that it's already time to close, because the discussion was warming up. And I thank so much that all the participants that actually accepted my invitation to contribute. And I also have to say that the task of being a moderator here was made very easy by the speakers, because with their lively interchangeable roles made it very interesting I'm sure for the audience, but also for myself. So on my side, I thank everybody, but I leave maybe the final words to Massimo and Michael if they want.
I just would like to thank everyone seriously. I'm sorry I cannot see you. It's very difficult. Yeah. It's very difficult. I wish next year this time we can meet in person again, and then in the monastery of Luxembourg, to the Grateful, we can continue discussing this in one of the rooms. It's really always good to get strong feedback and thinking about what you're doing. So I really appreciate that you sent your comments. Thank you very much. And Massimo and myself are open for any further discussion or send you documentation on criteria on sustainable lending or anything. So thanks again. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you for you too. And to everybody. And see you again.
Thank you from my side as well. Thanks to Charles, thanks to Gabriela for organizing, but thanks to Laura, which made it. And as a class now, so we need to let her go, I guess.
Yes,
okay.
I know.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks. Bye. Bye-bye.